Okay, I'm going to go ahead and talk to you guys about what we're covering today in regards to assessment. I'm going to go through the entire PowerPoint. This way I can use it again in this in any semester. And I'm also going to talk to you about information that's in the chapter that's not in the PowerPoint that is going to come up on your quiz. Also, we will talk about assignment 4, which is the authentic assessment assignment, where you're going to be creating a rubric. And I'll talk to you about ideas of what you could do with that rubric as we get to it. So that being said, let me go ahead and get started. I'll be looking over here, of course. Okay, so assessing students, and I'm just going to go through the whole thing again. If you've already seen me talk through this, bear with me. So we talked about high stakes testing and reasons for them throughout the country, especially in Texas, which seemed to be one of the first states to actually start implementing the high stakes tests. But there are really good reasons for that back in the 80s. Proponents, people who were for them, were trying to make sure that students across one state are getting the same sort of education as other students across the state. So students in El Paso are getting the same sort of basic knowledge and skills, at least, as those living in Beaumont. So that was a good reason for that because they didn't want some cities or school districts to have different curriculum, especially if you have a student who moves across state. You want to make sure that they're getting something similar in instruction. Into social promotion, which we talked about a little while ago, that was where students were moved up, promoted to, like, say, seventh to eighth grade due to their age, not necessarily because they learned the material. That happened especially in the 80s and before, because what they would rather have had happened was get that student the support they needed in order to be successful and not end up being part of the dropout rate that would occur. Hopefully that's come down, and it's gotten a lot better since we've been finding what our students need, rather than just socially promoting them, and also to identify weaknesses in the curriculum. Critics, of course, once they were actually implemented, noticed some of the following things happened. Schools' curriculums became narrowed. They were really only focusing on those testable TEKS. So some of the things that weren't necessarily testable, like research projects, for example, weren't really a focus for teachers either. If they wanted to do a research project, those were usually reserved for the end of the year. Untested subjects became marginalized or even eliminated. We're talking about the fine arts, maybe some vocational programs in our high schools. And for elementary especially, sometimes the tests weren't developmentally appropriate and some of the tests weren't culturally sensitive. So students with more experiences in their lives because of where they lived and the resources they had, would have done better on some of the tests because they were able to access so much more appropriate background knowledge. So those were things that were noticed once these were implemented. Now, here's just one of the national laws that were passed. Race to the Top really had the states focus more on creating state standards and creating state assessments in order to be eligible for federal funds. So this really kind of activated a lot of states into creating their own state assessments, and state assessments became much more common. There we go. Okay. So then we talked about authentic assessments and how they're different from your high stakes testing because these are more based on students' application and creation of artifacts or products that reflect what they've learned in the classroom. How do you grade such things? You can't grade those on a standardized test. A lot of times we need a way to measure these authentic products in some way that's going to give the students a grade, give them feedback on what they did well and what they maybe need to work on as challenges in their learning. And earlier I talked about how in a music class, chair tests would be a really good example of something that could require a rubric so students can see why this person got first chair and this person got second chair. What was it about their performance that bumped them up? It's a rubric would be really be the only reasonable tool to use in order to share that sort of information. Authentic assessments are different from your traditional assessments in a lot of ways. This kind of just gives you a quick summary of what it is about traditional assessments that are different from authentic. Traditional ones are usually multiple choice matching. So it's a select a response. It's usually covering lower level learning skills, not your higher order critical thinking skills. Um, and it's more about um, direct evidence rather than the indirect evidence that would be associated with your traditional assessments. So um, here we go. Moving on. Portfolios are a great example of an authentic assessment tool where students collect artifacts and products throughout the course of a grading period or throughout the course of a school year to show growth and rather than just show a numerical score. It's a great tool to use in the English class, in the fine arts classes, in your PE or athletics classes. Um, I know that when you do team selection, you're not going to give everybody a rubric showing what they did, but it would be really convenient for a coach or a team of coaches to have access to something like that to help them collaborate and choose students for particular sports teams. That's just one example of how it could be used effectively. Come on, computer. There we go. Here's more information on how to create it online if you want to do a digital portfolio. It's so much easier to do these days than it had been in the past. We have ways for students to create a PDF, perhaps, of a product they created to pull into a digital e-portfolio. So that's another option that students can have. Text complexity, we're not going to spend a lot of time on today. In subsequent semesters, I may, of course, but here what we're talking about is ways to assess the text for readability. Because you don't always get the readability measure when you get a new textbook. And a new textbook, it's kind of like the first time you use it, it's a little bit scary. You're not sure sometimes how well students are going to be able to adapt to new materials. But using some of the online tools that are available to help measure text complexity is going to help you know how much you're going to need to support that text with your students. And here are some different readability measures. They might give it to you on Lexile, Frygraph. You could use a closed procedure if you needed to, but there's so many great online tools you can use to help figure out if you need to support or maybe not support a text with your students in the classroom. We do find that textbooks tend to be a lot more challenging for students. Sometimes the readability level is higher than the actual grade level that it's intended for. So sometimes using a measure like that is really important. Okay, so let's go back and talk about the stuff that's not on the PowerPoint that you will need to be aware of for your quiz. And I think it's also important to be aware of just based on the fact that y'all are going to be teaching in the schools, and this is terminology related to assessment that you really need to be familiar with. Let's go to the textbook chapters. I have got your chapter 7 here. And there's some stuff in chapter 7 that wasn't on the PowerPoint. I need to fix that. But in the meantime, this will do. So the first thing in chapter 7, we talk about, we talk about FERPA and we talk about different things to be aware of. And we talked about FERPA back when we did the professionalism PowerPoint. Keep in mind when it comes to assessments, sharing the students' assessment results, even if they're just an informal assessment, you need to make sure that you keep things confidential, that not everybody in the classroom knows that Joe got a D. That's between myself and that's between Joe and Joe's parents, not the rest of the class. And so keep these things in mind when it comes to assessments. And that's why the FERPA is part of this PowerPoint or part of this chapter. It's because it really is tied in closely with assessments and student records. Okay, so here we go with summative versus formative assessments. Okay, don't have a chart for it. That's okay. But basically, Summative assessments, informative assessments, if you think about the words used in there, it's going to help you understand what they're used for. A summative assessment is the summation of what a kid learned throughout the course of a grading period. It is a measure of their ability to perform tasks, to, let's say, recall important facts and knowledge that you were intended for them based on your learning goals to have achieved by the end of a grading period. So think of your final exams or tests, end of unit or chapter tests, standardized or state assessments would be considered forms of summative assessments, and so forth. Formative assessments, think about formative. You're shaping their knowledge. Here, it's going to shape their knowledge. It's also going to show you how you can shape your instruction. So formative assessments are more about like doing a quick check to see how the student is doing at this point before we get to the summative assessment. So this is going to be like your maybe a daily quiz or a daily quick assessment at the end of a class or at the end of a week. Classroom discussions and questioning, observations of student work and class participation, exit tickets, which we'll talk more about when we get to writing strategies. So these are just ideas of how to measure students' progress toward that summative assessment. We know that benchmarks are often by our districts, not all the time, but a lot of times, especially when I was teaching, your benchmark assessments were considered formative by administration, but they were kind of treated like a summative assessment where they were like, how much have they learned at the end of this measurement period or whatever. So kind of be careful with how things are introduced to you and their use and how they're actually used, because we see that a lot of those benchmarks that are intended to be formative are actually treated by districts and schools as summative. So it's a little confusing, but I feel like this kind of clears up the differences between summative and formative. Okay. Now, here's more information on traditional versus authentic assessments if you're reading through it and you want to learn more about it. But rubrics is what is focused on for your assignment 4. Rubrics are ways to grade those assignments that can't be measured objectively, really easily. Where I'm thinking about writing assignments in your English class, could be presentations by students. It could be an art project. How am I going to give a grade on this research project that the student is presenting to the class and also have a paper describing as well? Rubrics come in handy, very handy when it comes to that. This is a sample rubric for a history presentation. I created with the assistance of ChatGTP. And so it just gives you an idea of how to organize the information on your rubric. And I know that some of y'all are really familiar with this. I know I've got a couple of paraprofessionals. You guys see these all the time. But some of y'all may be brand new to them. I know that my music majors are usually more familiar with rubrics. My kinesiology majors sometimes are as well if they've taken classes where they've been required to use a rubric or create a rubric. Today, I want you guys to consider creating something, and I don't want you to worry about it being perfect. I want you to try your hand at creating a rubric of your choice. You guys are all content specific, unless you're special education, which I know that means you can basically choose from whatever content you want. English majors, I don't mind if you use something from an English class to create this rubric. The whole point is to create a rubric. It's not to create something specific to the content area. So for the assignment, I do want you to think of what are the 4 things I want to measure, or at least 4 things I want to measure on this assignment. And I'm going to do an example for you in a minute too. Here with this history presentation, we see that the teacher is looking for content accuracy and depth, organization and clarity, delivery and communication, use of visual aids, and engagement in response to creations. Then I'm going to show my students exactly what I'm looking for them to get excellent, good, satisfactory, or needs improvement. And I can even have a little section at the bottom where I can type in details about why they got a satisfactory or needs improvement in one of the areas. But it also helps you give them a grade that looks so much more objective than how subjective a history presentation seems. So that is what I'm going to ask you guys to work on. We're going to cover blooms more when we get to the research chapter, which is, I think, week 5. So we'll cover blooms a little more closely. But if you get a chance, just kind of go through blooms. I think I might have a few questions. Look at your study guide for quiz 2. I might have a little bit in there about blooms, but I'm not asking you to memorize anything on blooms. Um, just be familiar with the fact that some questionings are going to be focused on the lower level of blooms, remembering understanding. That's going to be your traditional assessments. Your high stakes testing a lot of times are going to be, even in the application, a little bit. Your authentic assessments, you have so much more flexibility with hitting those critical thinking skills, with using some of these higher order thinking skills on blooms. So that's something else to, um, keep at the top of mind when you're thinking about how am I going to create something where students really have a deep understanding for learning in my classroom. Okay, so you are going to create let me get out of this real quick. You're going to create a rubric, and I'm going to let you choose whatever topic you want. And I'm going to share with you the notes that I created for my earlier class. And if you feel like you need me to pull this in for you, I can easily do that. I did this with the other class because I know that many of them have not considered rubrics. That's where a lot of times you guys have a lot more experience with. So some ideas I had for them, and you guys can use this too, to focus on. Let me go ahead and share my screen again because I got the page up. We go. Okay. Writing assessments, and that could be for any content area. Do I have a writing assignment for my students? How am I going to assess it? There we go. You can use a rubric. Research projects, demonstrations or presentations, or experiments in a science classroom. That's good for my science majors. Timelines or family trees in the history class. Creating a piece of art or performing a piece of music. These are ideas for you creating your rubrics. If you can find an online tool that assists you, there are lots of different rubric generators. Just let me know which one you used. But use an online tool if you want to. That's what real teachers do. Have them, it's a great way to assist them with what kind of language is expected in the rubric, things like that. But the requirements are this. I want your rubric to have at least 4 things you're looking for, 4 characteristics. And so here in the chapter, I've got the sample rubric for history. I like the way I designed it here because I'm going to look for the highest quality first. So you don't have to do it that way. I do it that way because it really helps me look for the positives and then work my way down if I need to. Um, but what criteria are you looking for? Let me go back to the Word document. Appropriate for, this is just example of characteristics you can use for a writing project. But then you want to have what I'm looking for to get that exceeds expectations. What do I look for to get the satisfactory expectations and so forth? I am not looking for a perfect rubric, but I want you guys to practice creating something that could be used as a rubric for measuring something you see yourself teaching once you get in the classroom. Um, I actually am going to pull this in for you guys because I realized I made some improvements to it. For my elementary educators, I had them tell me what topic is this for, what's the subject area, what grade level are you focusing on? And because I got a couple of, especially my K-12 educators, if you want to focus on the elementary grades, that's absolutely fine. My 7-12s, I know that you're going to probably choose something like Texas history or English 1 or English 2 or whatever, and that's fine. Just let me know what subject it is. And then 4 characteristics of your choice and at least 3 measurable areas. And yeah, I did this the backward way when I was creating it because I was in a hurry making my materials for class that day. But you can flip these as much as you want to. You can use this to turn in, or you could use whatever format your rubric is in. So all you've got to do is just submit your rubric. If you go to the let me go real quick to the assignment description. You'll see that it's there for you too. So if I scroll down here to assignment 4, I've got the instructions right there. At least I should. I don't have the instructions right there. Okay, that really stinks. But basically, the actually the assignment, it's actually on the template. So if you need instructions for the assignment, it's there. Create a rubric and score in one of these artifacts, whatever you want. And see chapter, actually that should be chapter 7 for examples. You will need the following: 4 characteristics at least 3 levels of proficiency. If you want to do more characteristics, knock yourself out. If you want to do 4 levels of proficiency, have fun. But practice, submit it. I'm looking for an attempt. If it's great, fantastic. If it's pretty good, I'll give you feedback. But I'm looking for a draft of a rubric, and you've got till Monday midnight. I'm going to change the due date. So that way, if on Monday you need to ask me questions about your rubric because you're sure you did it right, it gives us time to talk about it real quick. And then we can move on to the new material because we got so much to cover this semester each time we meet. But this will be due Monday midnight. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me or send me a text. You know I'll respond. Otherwise, guys, that's it. I'm going to send an announcement talking about what's due, what's coming due. I'm going to probably use the original announcement I just sent and just edit it and submit it again to you guys. But in the meantime, that's what I need from y'all. Practice making a rubric and do your best. And we'll talk about it Monday before we move on to, I think next week, the first thing we talk about is writing. And honestly, that's the shorter of the 2 days. Vocabulary is going to be a bear. So I'm hoping we get through the Monday stuff just fine because I'm going to have to spend so much time on vocabulary on Tuesday because vocabulary is so important for what you guys do in the classroom. Otherwise, guys, have a great rest of your week. Try to stay dry. I'll see you guys at Cafe Middle School tomorrow, 10 a.m. or earlier if that's what you choose. See you guys.